Good morning if you are in the West Coast, and good afternoon if you are in the East Coast. Good evening if you are joining us from Turkey. My name is Baki Tezcan. I teach history at the University of California in Davis, and I am the convener of the Turkey Now panel series on behalf of the Ottoman and Turkish Studies Association. Today, this event we co-organized with the Stanford Program on Turkey, thanks to my colleague Ayça Alemdaroğlu, who is the Associate Director of that program at Stanford University. And she will be actually introducing the speakers of today for you. And later in the program, you will also see Carol Woodall, my colleague, Associate Professor of History at the Colorado State University. And there, she's also the History and Women's and Ethnic Studies program. She will be joining us in the question and answer session in directing that part. And so without any further ado, and also keeping it very short, I just wanted to tell you later this month, you could join us again for a WhatsApp event on Hegnar Zeitlian Wattenpaugh's book, Missing Pages. Until then, have a wonderful session today. I'll be here asking questions too. Okay, Ayça, please go ahead.
Thanks, Baki. Thanks for co-organizing this event with me and being here, and also Carol Woodall, my colleague and friend, for being with us today. And also, I want to thank you for all that very exciting programming that you have been doing at OTSO. It's really energetic, and it has been wonderful. Thanks for that as well. So before introducing our speakers and the event today, I want to say a few words about the program on Turkey. We launched the program last year at Center for Democracy, Development and the Rule of Law at Stanford's Freeman Spogli Institute. The program aims to provide a platform for critical analysis and research on politics and society in Turkey. Through research projects, speaker events, and conferences, we seek to provide and facilitate an understanding of the country, its changing internal dynamics, as well as external relations in connection with the region as well as the globe. So we also try to highlight potential agents and viable pathways for a democratic and sustainable future in the country. So if you're interested, please check our website. My colleague Sasha Cohen will be posting it on the chat box. Join our mailing list. And please do follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Stanford CDDRL. I want to also acknowledge another initiative at Stanford that I think this audience will be interested to hear about and follow, the Ottoman and Turkey encounters. And I would like to mention the names of my colleagues, Ali Yaycıoğlu and Deniz Gil, who co-founded the OTES as an intellectual forum to cultivate new perspectives and encourage a radical rethinking of the relationship between intellectual work, public engagement, and action. Today we're delighted to host Behlül Özkan and Mehmet Ali Tuğtan. Behlül Özkan is an associate professor of international relations at Marmara University, Istanbul. He received his PhD from Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He is the author of From the Abode of Islam to the Turkish Vatan, Making of a National Homeland in Turkey, from Yale University Press, which was published in 2012. Özkan also contributed op-eds to New York Times, Huffington Post, Open Democracy. He's also a board member of the European Council on Foreign Relations, and his recent academic work has been focusing on political Islam in Turkey and Europe. Mehmet Ali Tuğtan is an assistant professor in international relations at Istanbul Bilgi University. He has a PhD in political science from Boğaziçi University. His research focuses on Turkish-American relations, contemporary world politics, and security studies. Dr. Tuğtan has an edited book on the Turkish involvement in the Korean War, Kore Savaşı, Uzak Savaş'ın askerleri. He is the head of Bilgi's Distance Education Center since 2017, and he teaches massive online open courses on edX, on contemporary issues in world politics, as well as a course on the EU. So we invited Professor Özkan and Tuğtan to present on a recent book that Behlül Özkan and Tolga Gürakar has edited, Türkiye'nin Soğuk Savaş Düzeni, Turkey's Cold War Order. The book is, in their term, a historical archaeology of the Cold War era and offers a comprehensive analysis of the role of the military, business, and the US Cold War policy in the formation of today's Turkey. The book aims to counter an understanding of Turkey that has been very prevalent until recently in the international media and academia. This is the reading of Turkey as a clash between the secular state in the center and Islamic society in the periphery. And their book painstakingly shows the history and the networks, the agents of Islamization in the center of the state. The story that they tell is significant in several ways in understanding contemporary Turkey and the rise of Turkey's governing party AKP, as well as the disappointments it created. It also has implications for American foreign policy, especially as it's being refashioned under President Biden's new administration. For one, this multilateral globalism that President Biden spearheads, I think would benefit from taking in account of the past damages inflicted on countries such as Turkey, both during the Cold War and more recently during the democracy promotion phase of under Bush and Obama. So I think their book also makes an important sort of case about this this sort of how to rethink American policy in concentration with what has happened in the Cold War. So each speaker will speak for about 15 minutes before, and then we will begin Q&A. Please write your questions in the chat. My colleague Carol Woodall and I will be moderating the panel. I would like to ask everyone, especially the co-hosts, to keep their microphones off. So let's start with Behlül.
Thank you, Professor Ayça Alemdaroğlu. I would like to thank, first of all, program on Turkey at Stanford University to organize such a panel for us, and also Ottoman Turkey Encounters program. As Professor Ayça and also Professor Ayça Alemdaroğlu to invite us and organize all the details for this program. As Professor Ayça Alemdaroğlu mentioned, our book is mainly on the Cold War in Turkey, and we are trying to portray the Cold War Turkish establishment and how it supported Islamization in Turkey. But our starting point is not Cold War, but our starting point is AKP. In 1990s, there was a rise of political Islam in Turkey. In 1994, the local elections were won by the Islamist Party, and two metropolitan cities of Turkey, Istanbul and Ankara, were ruled by Islamist politicians. And Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the rise of his political career started in 1994 when he became the first Islamist mayor of Istanbul. And in 1995, the Islamist Party won the election, became the #1 party in Turkey. And in 1996, we had the first Islamist prime minister in Turkey, Necmettin Erbakan. And in 2002, AKP came to power as a majority and received the majority in the parliament and has been ruling Turkey for the last 20 years. When AKP came to power, most Turkish academics, Turkish liberals, some left-wing scholars, and also most of the Western academics saw it as a positive development. And the paradigm was AKP is an Islamist party, and it won the majority in the parliament, and it represents the civil side of Turkish politics, civil society. It represented the periphery. This paradigm analyzed Turkey based on the dichotomy. On the one side, and this dichotomy is very well established in Turkish studies. And our book basically tried to revise it or challenge this paradigm. What is this paradigm? When you read the books and articles on Turkish studies, most of them talk about this dichotomy between Kemalism and Islamism. It's a very well-established paradigm. Accordingly, there is a Kemalist center in Turkish politics, and since 1923, since the establishment of the republic, this Kemalist authoritarian controlled by Turkish military, and this Kemalist core, authoritarian secular core, rules Turkey and suppresses the civil society, the conservative Islamist civil society, the periphery. And therefore, AKP is the representative of this periphery, and when it has the opportunity to come to power, it will democratize Turkey, and Turkey will be a liberal democratic state, getting rid of this Kemalist authoritarian military establishment. However, 20 years passed, and we can easily ask today this question: what went wrong? And after 20 years, AKP's rule, Turkish democracy has serious problems: freedom of press, human rights, academic freedom. Turkey has serious issues, and Turkey is not advanced on these issues compared to 2002. It's at a worst state. And our book really emerged from this question: what went wrong? And when we say what went wrong with this analysis of Turkish politics based on this dichotomy, Kemalism and Islamism? And well, at that point, we wrote this book in Turkish, and it was published last year. And 10 academics contributed to this project. And our main thesis is this Kemalist Islamism dichotomy really doesn't explain, at least Turkey's Cold War. We can really use this dichotomy during the early Republican period, 1920s and 30s. But beyond that, when we reached 1940s, when we reached the Cold War, late 1940s, this dichotomy doesn't explain what was going on in Turkey at that time. And our book really argues that the first Islamization in Turkey during the Cold War started, surprisingly for many of you, with CHP's at the CHP's time in late 1940s. And at that time, CHP initiated this Islamization, and the Imam courses, the religious courses were allowed for CHP. And there were also a number of religious reforms during the CHP time. And therefore, contrary to most Turkish secularists, the Islamization, the first Islamization wave, did not start with the Democrat Party in 1950s, but it started in late 1940s during CHP time. And in 1950s, when Democrat Party came to power, most of these Islamists found a free space, and there were also religious openings in Turkey. First of all, Ezan was once again went from Turkish to Arabic, and the Imam Hatip schools, the number of Imam Hatip schools increased, and religious tarikats, religious brotherhoods found a space to develop their activities. When we reach to 1960s, we face the second wave of Islamization, and that really, our book really concentrates on 1960s. There are a number of articles looking 1960s from different perspectives. And in our book's title, we name 4 important players in Turkey's Cold War, and who that really played a major role in his Cold War establishment. Army, Turkish capitalist class, and third, United States or Turkey's Western, Turkey's relations with Western allies, and fourth, Islamists. The fourth is very surprising for many Turkish experts, studies experts, and I would like to talk a little bit on that, 1960s, and how Turkey's Islamists became an indispensable part of this Cold War establishment. Well, in 1960s, 1962 was a turning point in this Islamization. Because after the 1960 coup, there was the first parliament was established in 1961, and CHP came to power. But in early 1960s, we see the rise of political left in Turkey. Turkey's working class party was established. TİP, Türkiye İşçi Partisi, Turkey's Workers' Party was established. And we see the rise of working class movement. Trade unions became important dynamics of Turkish politics coming from the left, and there were also student movements, left-wing student movements, and we see the rise of left. And Turkish army, supposedly Turkish, secular Turkish army, and national intelligence organization controlled by Turkish army, and at that time in 1962, an important Turkish general, Fuat Doğu, became the head of Turkish national intelligence. Turkish army and Turkish national intelligence, interestingly, played a very important role to establish Turkish Islamists as an antidote against the rising left from the periphery. Therefore, our main hypothesis is exactly the opposite of the established paradigm in Turkey. Contrary to the established paradigm, we argue that Turkish Islamists were supported against the rising left from the periphery by Turkish army and by the Turkish capitalists and by Turkey's Western alliance, namely United States. And interestingly, Turkish national intelligence played a very important role in that. In 1962, we see the first book of Seyyid Kutup in Turkish, İslam'da Sosyal Adalet, Social Justice in Islam. This book was translated from Arabic into Turkish with the initiation of Turkish national intelligence against the rising left. In 1962, we saw important developments in Turkey, and this explains the foreign dynamic of Islamization. In 1962, in Mecca, during the pilgrimage season, Muslim World League was established by Saudi Arabia. And this became, in 1960s and 70s, one of the most important pan-Islamist organizations in the Muslim world. And this Muslim World League was established by Saudi Arabia, but there were lots of Muslim leaders coming from all over the Islamic world. And there were also 2 Turkish members of that. One of them was a key figure of Islamism in Turkey, Behlül Özkan. And he really, with the Saudi help, he really funded many Islamist journals in 1960s, and he was the owner of the main Islamist press in Turkey, who really translated most of the Maududi's and Seyyid Kutup's book into Turkish. Therefore, we see, and this in 1960s, when Turkish politics was under the control of Turkish military, or under the strict influence of Turkish military, we see before becoming a political members, they were really becoming strong players in media, in civil society, and they were supported in the press and in publishing sector. In 1968, there was an important publication in Turkey, publication, and in 1968, this journal published an MIT report, a national intelligence report. This report is, for me, very, it really influenced my studies in 1960s of Turkish politics. And this report really was a leaked national intelligence report, because I mentioned that in my speech, Turkish military supported Islamism in Turkey against the rising left, but there were Kemalist and secularist generals and low-ranking officers in Turkish army who were really very unhappy with this Islamization in Turkey. However, they were minority at that time. And they couldn't stop this Islamization other than leaking national intelligence documents. And I would like to ask Professor Ayça Alemdaroğlu to share this chart. Basically, this is from the leaked national intelligence document published by Ant Journal in March 1968. This report is about Islamization in Turkey, and its title is very interesting for me. Its title is Organization of Muslim Brotherhood in Turkey. And as you see, the Turkish speakers would notice that at the top you see Müslüman kardeşler, Muslim Brotherhood. And we see in this chart different branches of Islamist organization in Turkey. On the right side, you will see Komünizmle Mücadele Dernekleri, anti-communist organizations, the Turkish Youth Organization, and the other organizations, other youth organizations and civil society organizations in Turkey. On the left, you will see Islamist organizations in Turkish state institutions. And on the center, you will see the educational organization of Islamist groups and the media groups. Well, this chart is very interesting because if you read the report, the leaked national intelligence report, in 1968, Necmettin Erbakan was portrayed as the future prime minister of Turkey. And this is 1 year before he became a member of the parliament. What's interesting in this chart is, if you, I'm not going to explain all of these boxes because it would take more than 15 minutes for me to explain. But what's interesting in this chart is, and if you read the intelligence report, you will see Turgut Özal, who became a member of parliament in 1980s and prime minister and president of Turkey, mentioned one of the important actor of Islamist in Turkish state planning organization, Planlama. And then his brother, who was the head of the Turkish Petroleum Association. You will see Topbaş family, for example, which is a very influential Islamist family who owned corporations in Turkey. You will see also MTTB, Turkish Youth Organization, who were Islamized after 1965. And at that time, when this report was leaked, its leader was Ismail Kahraman, who became later during the AKP era the head of the Turkish parliament. And you will see also Islamist businessmen owned media companies in Turkey. Therefore, this Islamization in Turkey was not a surprise, or it was not coming from the periphery, but as early as 1960s, we will notice that there were lots of statesmen, top-level bureaucrats, rich capitalists owning corporations, newspapers, and schools. We see youth organizations supported by Turkish state, Turkish military against the rising left, and they Islamicized the key youth organizations in Turkey. And we also see how Necmettin Erbakan became the leader of this, political leader of this Islamization as early as 1968. Well, the second wave of Islamization started in 1960s, and Islamists received the fruits of this Islamization in 1970s. In 1969 election, we see the first Islamist groups entered into the parliament under the leadership of Necmettin Erbakan. But after the 1973 election, we see Islamist Party, Milli Selamet Partisi, becoming coalition partners and ruling key ministries such as Interior Ministry and Justice Ministry in Turkey, which were the key ministries, and the Turkish state did not have problems. These ministries ruled by Islamists. And the third wave of Islamization really started in 1990s, and its peak was reached by AKP becoming obtaining the majority in the parliament. However, this was not a surprise, or this was not a turning point, really. It was the AKP's coming to power in 2002 was really the outcome of Cold War establishment and Turkey's Cold War order. This was the conclusion of our project. And I would like to end here and leave the floor to Mehmet Ali Tuğtan.
Thank you. I would like to start by thanking our hosts for this organization and for the opportunity to talk about the lasting legacy of the Cold War on Turkish politics and on our recently published book on the same subject. Now, my dear colleague and friend Behlül Özkan outlined how political Islam assumed center stage in Turkish politics in the 1990s, seemingly, but in fact, as a result of a process that goes deep into the history of the Cold War. Now, given the mixed nature of our audience, I couldn't decide how to divide the time, so I decided to split it evenly. In the beginning, I will talk to more the political science and comparative politics people, and then in the middle, I will talk to the historians. And in the conclusion, I will talk somewhere in between. Now, when you look at Turkish politics, even a precursory glance would reveal something very awkward. The populist left is missing, and when you come to think of it, it's mind-blowing, because it's not like a certain type of organization of the popular left or certain kinds of trends and actors that you could identify with popular left in Turkey that is missing. The whole spectrum is missing. It's not there. The underclass populist left movements, which are the bread and butter of politics in several Latin American countries with very similar politico-economic indicators to Turkey, is not there. In its stead is the political Islamist establishment, and that's strange. In the words of İdris Küçükömer, who had famously said, in Turkey, the left is right and the right is left. Political Islamists are occupying a space in the political spectrum that is in many other countries occupied by populist left. So you have to ask the obvious question, where is the left in Turkey? Where did it go? Has it ever existed? We are old enough, Behlül and I at least, to personally testify, yes, it did. We had seen it with our own eyes. It existed particularly powerfully, as Behlül had said, in the 1960s and 70s, and then it was gone. And in its place, sort of mushroomed the political Islamist establishment. So here we are. This is not just a question of political history curiosity. It has direct effects on our daily lives here in Turkey right now, which I usually describe with the following scene from the movie Blues Brothers. If I may share, you can see my screen, I hope.
Well, now, what can I get you boys? You thirsty, you hungry, or you just driving through? Maybe like a beer or something a little harder? Hey, we happen to make the state's best pepper steak.
No, thank you, ma'am. We may be sucking back a few beers a little later on. We'll be here all night. You see, we're the band.
You are? Oh, gee, that's nice. Hey, Bob, this is the band.
All right. What kind of music do you usually have here?
Oh, we got both kinds. We got country and western.
Okay, when you look at Turkish politics today, you have a governing hegemony of conservative nationalists and political Islamists. So we have both kinds, country and Western, and that's it. So again, the question begs, where is the left? How was it replaced with political Islam? Now, the classical answer provided by the critical or revisionist history writing of liberal academia in Turkey, particularly in the 1990s and the early 2000s, concentrating on the primary resources that sprung up during those 2 decades on early Republican and late Ottoman history, suggest a very simple answer. The Kemalists did it. The Kemalists destroyed the Turkish left. And in its stead, the periphery expressed itself through the means and institutions and actors of political Islam. And this, by implication, this also, of course, legitimizes their later support for political Islamist movements, whom they have claimed moved towards the mainstream of Turkish politics under the AK Party. Now, our book on the Cold War order of Turkey tries to examine and refute this argument, because the answer, the Kemalists did it, invites more questions. The first of which is, who are the Kemalists? Because when you look into the core periphery explanation in which the Kemalists occupy the core and the political Islamists occupy the periphery, everybody almost except political Islamists seem to be Kemalists, from Alparslan Türkeş to Süleyman Demirel, even at times to Necmettin Erbakan, all major actors and institutions of Turkish politics end up being Kemalists at some point. There is this quotation from the Quran on Turkish graveyards. At some point, everybody will taste mortality. And it's something like that. In the end, everybody will be painted Kemalist, according to this analysis. And it's kind of all-encompassing, so all-encompassing that it becomes meaningless. You know, after 2015, we have actually seen the very demonstration when estranged from their former political allies, the same liberal intelligentsia complained that Erdogan and AK Party had become Kemalists. So this leaves almost no one in Turkish political scene who are not Kemalists. So this is a problem. Secondly, of course, why would the Kemalists, whoever they are, replace populist left with political Islamists? Even a casual look at early Republican history would give you the impression that right or left-leaning, the homo Kemalismus, as Ayhan Aktar and İştar Gözaydın have called the generation of early Republican intelligentsia, the homo Kemalismus fears two things. One, the communists, and two, the political Islamists. And they fear political Islamists more than they fear the socialists. So it is very problematic to assume that they would actually prefer replacing one with the other. At worst, they would combat both and try to diminish their influence and replace them with a more secular, if conservative kind of nationalism. So, in order to understand what happened to the populist left in Turkish politics and how and through which mechanisms, actors and institutions and processes it was replaced with political Islam, we have to, we assume, return to the history of the Cold War or even earlier. In my particular chapter, I concentrate on the employment of nationalism and political Islam as anti-communist instruments from 1945 to early 1970s. And the history actually starts from the 1930s. You see, in the 1930s, the Kemalists are divided into three branches. There is the left-leaning group like Şevket Süreyya Aydemir, Asaf Belge, Hasan Ali Yücel, İsmail Hakkı Tonguç, and so on. And then there are the more right-leaning people like Şemsettin Sirer and Recep Peker and so on. And at their center, jockeying both groups, is Kemal Atatürk, with his somewhat outdated, old-fashioned notion of republicanism, trying to feed his revolution from both currents of thought. The interwar years being a laboratory of secular ideologies, it is natural that his domestic experiment was inspired from all sorts of ideologies prevalent at the time. And when you come to look at that era, Mustafa Kemal was able to occupy center stage in Turkish politics through his charisma and political capital as the founding president of the Republic. And by 1936, he had already curbed the more radical elements of both the right and the left. And by 1937, he had even parted ways with his old-time friend and second-in-command, İsmet İnönü, to replace him with Celal Bayar, known for his centrist views, as premier. And then Atatürk dies. And when Atatürk dies, he is replaced by İsmet İnönü, who lacks Atatürk's charisma and political capital, but nevertheless has to hold the helm, so to speak, in a stormy weather. The Second World War is at the gates. the republic needs to be steered clear away from this catastrophe. And there, İnönü cancels the ideological debate. When you look at publications of the era, publications on Kemalism dry out very rapidly during the war years. The very lively discussion on what Kemalism as an ideology is or should be in the 1930s is silenced. Secondly, İnönü is a prudent and conservative person, and as such, he chooses to mend fences with old friends, particularly those who were banished by Atatürk after the 1926 İzmir assassination attempt. And he invites them back. These Union and Progress people, like Nuri Kiligil Pasha, who was the brother of Enver Pasha and had to stay in Germany until 1938. These people had good connections with Nazi Germany. And they were, in fact, in a position to bargain with the German government, with Adolf Hitler's government, under the guise of plausible denial, because they were not officials of the Republic. So when the war broke out and Turkey remained neutral in this war, İnönü made a careful division of labor, appointing several former Union and Progress people he had invited back to Turkey with the informal task of keeping tabs on Nazi Germany, where they had Kameraden, as the German term goes, old-time war buddies who fought alongside each other during the First World War. And these war bodies included very influential people like Karl Dönitz, or the command echelons of the German land forces. So with this in mind, İnönü tried to keep Turkey out of the war, pursuing a neutral policy. And as part of that policy, old friends, Kameraden, kept tabs on Germany. When the Germans attacked Soviet Russia, the İnönü government faced a very difficult decision. Because, as I said, if there was one thing the Kemalists feared more than anything else, that was the communists. And the idea that the Nazis, they didn't respect or particularly liked the Nazis, but the idea that the Nazis could somehow destroy the Soviet Union sounded like a good opportunity. What is more, the Germans blitzed through the Soviet Union, and when they did that, they captured several hundreds of thousands of Muslim Turkic troops. So İnönü's government decided to intervene on their behalf as well, not just them as people, but on behalf of their communities. If the Germans won the war, they wanted the Turkic peoples to be in advantageous conditions. And whether the Germans won the war or not, they wanted the POWs, the Turkic POWs, to be treated well. So this network that emanated from the First World War years and continued in the 1930s and into the Second World War created the main connection between some key figures of German military intelligence and the Turkish establishment. Key in this respect were these people. Now, in the middle is Gerhard von Mende, the post-ministerium Turkologist who organized most of the political diplomatic effort to unite the Turkic peoples and enlist them on the side of the German cause. To the left is Reinhard von Gehlen, the director of the Fremde Heere Ost, the German military intelligence in the Eastern Front. To the right is Karl Wolff, the SS general who, in the later phases of the war, commanded the German units in Italy, including the 162nd Turkistani division. And at the bottom, two collaborators. In the middle, Ruzi Nazar, who was an Uzbek POW enlisted in the Turkistani division. And in the right, you see Haj Emin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, who departed North Africa with the Axis powers in 1943 and proceeded to work alongside the Muslim units in Nazi service. Now, when the war ended and the Germans lost, the relationship reversed. These people who used to gather intelligence and initiate operations against the Soviet Union were employed this time by the CIA. During the early phases of the Cold War, the American political establishment realized they had no files on the Soviet Union whatsoever, and they needed them pronto. So they employed the readily available workforce. Key again in this endeavor were people like Mende and Gehlen. And when they were recruited by the CIA, these people brought in, their contacts. And part of their contacts were the right-wing people in Turkey, with whom they were in contact during the Second World War. Now, at the same time, Turkey was trying to enter the Western camp and was weary of the overbearing Soviet demands on the eve of the Cold War. So together, these two processes led to a rising of nationalists, conservative nationalists, in Turkish politics during the first decade and a half of the Cold War. The nationalists were a sound basis for anti-communist struggle, and they were also familiar with the people who were entrusted by the American establishment to run the anti-communist struggle. So, by 1950s, these people increased their collaboration with the conservative nationalists, particularly in Turkey. Alparslan Türkeş was an old and familiar face from the Turanist trials of 1944. By 1946, he was dispatched to the United States alongside 15 other officers to receive advanced infantry training. By late 1950s, he was the Turkish army's NATO representative in the Pentagon. And establishing the connection with him was Ruzi Nazar, who was now working for the CIA. In Europe, in Munich, where the anti-communist Muslim groups were being organized by the CIA, as well as the German intelligence, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, which was established in 1955 under the leadership of Reinhard Gehlen himself, the Americans and Germans were doing the best they could to translate the anti-communist or anti-Bolshevist, as the German term goes, struggle know-how from the Nazi era into the Cold War. In most cases, the same people, the same organizations, or even the same names were simply translated into new ownership. Thus, it was very easy in this time to see that ultimately it was the conservative nationalists and their allies in the Western intelligence establishment that were leading the anti-communist struggle. But there was a problem. By late 1950s, it was evident that you needed an army of the devoted if you wanted to counter an army of the devoted. These were words written by Said Ramazan, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood and the World Muslim Congress, written to Arthur Schlesinger in 1961. He said, you need people who act on their own initiative and on their own behalf, for their own good. These were not the secular nationalists. They could not be popularized as an ideological movement, particularly among the underclasses, particularly in the newly urbanizing, rapidly urbanizing ghettos of the developing world. The new urban, modern underclass needed something to replace socialism and populist left that sounded and looked like their own. And that would be political Islam. Why? Because the experiences in places like Egypt, Indonesia, showed that secular nationalism in the third world was basically owned by the decolonizing or anti-colonizing national liberation movements, who, as is the case in Egypt, tended to be anti-American at the same time. So you couldn't rely on a secular nationalist program as an effective antidote for communism. Thus entered political Islam. From the second half of 1950s into the 1960s, the roles between conservative nationalism as the big partner and political Islam as the small partner in the fight against communism switched. Political Islam increasingly came to the fore, while conservative nationalism, anti-communist nationalism, receded to the background. This general shift in the Western level of support towards these two respective movements also had its roots in the generational change. By mid-1960s, the original Soviet exile or World War II era secular nationalist anti-communists were dying off or being discredited, revealed and branded as Nazi collaborators. Thus, new actors were coming to the stage, and the most prominent of them were the political Islamists, who were supported in translating the discontent of the urban underclass into mainstream politics without being communist. That was key. And most importantly, and with that I will conclude, I know I have exceeded my time. The most important thing is this shift, this Houdini kind of replacement didn't take place through the natural competition between populist left actors on the one hand, political Islamists on the other hand. They competed in a fair fight, and the political Islamists won. No. The government at the local and the Western alliance at the global levels continuously suppressed the left while encouraging and supporting the political Islamists. Thus, we arrived at the 1990s, early 2000s, and as Behlül Özkan suggested, we now have both kinds, country and Western, but no populist left. And with that, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you both. I would like everyone to write their questions and answers in the chat column below. And now with that, we can start the Q&A. So the first question is about trying to sort of tease out the links of the story that you're telling with the region, the wider region. And the person asks Perry Bloom, and the question is, if the first wave of Islamization in Turkey arose in the late 40s, did you find any correlation between this first wave and the establishment of Israel in 1948 and the related military conflicts in the region?
I assume the question is for me.
Either of you can take it.
Okay, I can briefly comment and then leave the floor to Mehmet Ali. Actually, there is no relationship between the formation of Israel and then the first Islamization in Turkey. However, maybe there is a there might be a connection, or there might be a hint, because Mehmet Ali mentioned the name Said Ramadan in his speech, and who was a very influential figure in Muslim Brotherhood, who was the son-in-law of Hassan el-Banna. And in 1950, he came to Turkey in November 1950, and he participated in a Friday ceremony in Istanbul, and he gave a speech, the hutbeh there, in Arabic and translated into Turkish. And the crowd was really enjoyed his speech. And he interviewed with Turkish journalists, and he said, before coming to Turkey, I expected that Islam was completely destroyed in this country, and however, I found out a very vivid Islamist network, and I was surprised. I mean, this is a very important statement by one of the key figures of Muslim Brotherhood, who came to Turkey and stayed in the country for a couple of weeks in 1950, and who, with his own eye, noticed the Islamization, the fruits of Islamization started late CHP era. But I don't see any link with the formation of Israel and Islamization in the first Islamization wave in Turkey.
Mehmet Ali, would you like to comment as well?
Well, only one remark. Not the first, but maybe the later phases in the 1960s, because the establishment of Israel and Egypt's assumption of the leadership of the Arab nationalists against Israel was one of the key reasons why the Americans supported the Muslim Brotherhood. And with that, you have a connection, because through Muslim Brotherhood, you had the modern contours of political Islam in the Cold War, and that translated into political Islam in Turkey after 1965, 1966. And in that sense, there is a relationship, but not a direct one, I would add.
Okay. I would like everyone also send their questions to Carol would also, that we could together go through them instead of just me. We will appreciate if you alternate. So another question, would like to sort of would like an analysis of the sort of changes between pre-1950 left and right, and its Cold War reincarnation. So I guess this question would like you to reflect on the continuities of political ideologies and groups in Turkey between pre-1950 and after 1950, briefly, yeah. And this question by my colleague at Stanford, Burçak Keskin Kozat.
Behlül, would you go first or? Okay. Now, from my perspective, the most important break occurs not in 1950, but during the Second World War, when İsmet İnönü comes to power. And as I suggested, discontinues the discussion on ideology and leans ever more towards his familiar conservative nationalist wartime buddies, you know, the Union and Progress people whom he invited back to Turkey. And, you know, just to give you an idea, the Turanists, whom the Nazis supported in Turkey very strongly in 1940, 1941, 42, 43. By 1944, they were all arrested. Actually, May 3rd is the day that is commemorated for that prosecution of the Turanists. And May 3rd, 1944, by 1946, in less than 2 years, Recep Peker is prime minister. More importantly, in 1943, the newly established Republican People's Party parliamentary group is full with people who, in the words of one witness, are of Turkic stock. That means the Romanians, the Caucasians, the Circassians, and so on, who were more influential in the early Republican polity, were eliminated. And that was an intentional design. Delegated to Reşat Şemsettin Sirer by İsmet İnönü. Not even the Prime Minister, Saracoğlu, was in charge. And it is these people who founded the Cold War conservative Turkish nationalism. These people who grew from the Second World War era, maintained their contacts, maintained their unity, even during the multi-party era. So that's one very important break and then continuity into the Cold War for me in the Turkish political right. I do not feel, to be the authority to speak on the Turkish left, so I'll leave that to Behlül.
For me, 1945 was a turning point because at that year, the Second World War ended, and Turkish establishment under the leadership of İnönü, the biggest fear was the left is going to come to power with the help of Soviet Union. It was a baseless fear, but it was a fear. And İnönü was afraid that the newly forming opposition under the leadership of Celal Bayar, Adnan Menderes, and Fuat Köprülü will unite with the left-wing opposition, Sabiha Serdar, Zekeriya Sertel, and Tevfik Rüştü Aras. And his objective was to split the opposition into two parts and destroy the left, the weak, the left-wing opposition in Turkey. And the critical turning point was December 1945, when the youth was organized by CHP Istanbul, who was a mob and who destroyed the left-wing press, Tam Matbaası in Turkey, who participated in that mob organized by CHP. Süleyman Demirel was there, and Necmettin Erbakan also. There are rumors that he was also there, and Turgut Özal was there. And interestingly, the key members of the Turkish right, who played a major role in Turkish politics during the long Cold War, was organized as young university students by CHP in 1945 to destroy the left-wing press in Turkey. And that's, for me, is a very striking portrayal of Turkish politics and its anti-communism really founded by CHP. Therefore, many Turkish experts today think that CHP has been a left-wing party since 1923, but until 1965, I would position CHP as a center-right party.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this question by Anu Kalkan has two parts. One is, how would the history narrated here connect to the change within the political Islam or the way Islam was conceptualized in Turkey? In other words, what are your observations regarding the change of Islam's political conceptualization during this period?
Behlül, would you like to go first on this one?
Honestly, I didn't understand the question. Could you please repeat or simplify
so
it?
it would be around the idea of the conceptualization of political Islam. How is that shifting over time?
Conceptualization of political Islam by whom? By academics or by themselves?
That is actually not necessarily stated in the question itself. I think it's in regards to specifically this movement against communism. Does this anti-communist movement actually contribute to a reconceptualization of political Islam over time?
Okay, during the Cold War, political Islam in Turkey was positioned and supported by the Turkish establishment, by the Turkish military intelligence, and Turkish, also by the Turkish capitalist establishment, as an anti-communist movement against the rising left. But since the beginning of this seminar, we have to mention one important point. Turkish Islam, political Islam in Turkey was not founded by the center, by the Turkish establishment. It has been there at least since the late 19th century. Turkish Islam is political Islam in Turkey, also in the late Ottoman period, has been a key political actor. But in 1960s, it found the opportunity to unite itself with the Turkish establishment. And this alliance was formed based on anti-communism. However, there are two more important anti-dynamics in Turkish political Islam. In the first one, Turkish political Islam, based on anti-communism, made an alliance with the Turkish establishment, also with the Turkish deep state. Second, two more antis were, it was an anti-Semitic movement, and the anti-Semitism plays a very important role in the discourse of Turkish political Islam. And also, the third anti-dynamic is anti-Masonism, I would say. The Anti-communism, its enemy is the rising left. Anti-Semitism aimed Turkish Westernist capitalist class, and it portrayed Turkish Westernist capitalist class as a tool of international Jewish lobby and Israel. This is the portrayal of Turkish political Islam, and we have to keep in mind that political Islam in Turkey also represented a capitalist class, mainly in Anatolian cities. Therefore, there is an internal capitalist struggle between the Anatolian-based Turkish Islamist capitalist class and metropolitan cities-based Turkish capitalist class who had deep connections with the Western economies. And therefore, anti-Semitism plays a very important role because Turkish political Islam portrayed the Westernist capitalist class as a tool of Zionist lobby in the world. You will see tons of material in Islamist journals starting in 1960s on that. The third anti-dynamic was anti-Masonism, and that's also very interesting. And it aimed the center-right parties, mainly in 1960s and 70s, Demirel. Political Islam as a far-right ideology represents itself the only representative of Turkish nation. The center-left is obviously a communist and it's an enemy of the nation. And the center-right, the main center-right party and its leader, Süleyman Demirel, was represented as a tool of Masonic movement, and therefore anti-Masonism was used against the center-right in political Islam. Maybe this would help to clarify the question about the conceptualization of political Islam. And I believe this three anti-dynamics still plays a very important role in the discourse of political Islam even today.
I would like to add by making some remarks on the self-conceptualization of political Islam in that same period and how this was influenced by the Cold War. Now, as I said, in the 1950s and early 60s, it was the nationalists, the conservative nationalists who had ties to the Soviet exiles, POWs who had collaborated with the Nazis and so on, or through Hacı Emin Hüseyni to the collaborators in the Arab Peninsula and North Africa. With the arrival of figures like Said Ramadan, we see the arrival of a new, reformed, if you will, understanding, an urban understanding of Islam. And in his book, Three Fundamental Problems of Islam Today, Ramadan describes that the most important thing in terms of political mobilization is the position of the women, whom the more traditional Islamists confined to home and to the private space. Ramadan objected to that view. He said, in order for the struggle to succeed, we need the women on the public space, but we are Muslims, so we will be segregated and the women will be veiled, but not veiled in the traditional sense. They will wear urban clothing befitting of Islamic virtue. How? Well, I can show one particular example. Now, these are pictures of prominent Islamists of the time. In the center is Ramadan himself, who described in detail in his book how the headscarf and the gloves and the overcoat of a virtuous Islamic woman in a public gathering should be. And these are the women who followed that track. Now, Ramadan was writing in late 1950s, early 1960s, and he was addressing, because he published in German, he was primarily addressing the Muslims in Germany. But the problem was, at the time, the big migrant Muslim populations, the Turks, the Arabs, and so on, they were still in a traditional mode of Islamic life. And you had to wait for a second generation, for a younger generation, to arrive university age, for them to be politically active. So the first, so to speak, pioneering Muslim women who assumed this active, urban, politically active position were the converts, muhtedi. The converts were German women, usually married to Muslim, politically active Muslim men, who assumed Islam and engaged in the struggle alongside their spouses. One such example, and one of the most prominent in German Muslim circles, was Fatima Grimm. Seen here in the left, in Pakistan, where she had spent 2 years with his Chechen Orientalist husband, Ömer Abdulaziz. You could see the striking similarity of this attire to the later examples of political Islamist activists in many other countries. She was one of the first examples. What makes Fatima Grimm so special, however, is the fact that she was born to this world as Anna Lily Wolf, the daughter of General Karl Wolf, who was part of the Cold War struggle in anti-communism since he had established his first contacts with Alan Dulles in 1945. So, to the right, you see the reflections of this general understanding to the Turkish political understanding. And the intermediary is at the top, Rotraut Scher, who had assumed Islam and changed her name to Cemile Alkonavi. Mm. And the person she influenced was Şule Yüksel Şener, as stated in their biographies. So in that sense, the understanding of a more urban, politically active, reformist Islam was supported by the Cold War mechanisms as an antidote to populist left and socialism.
We have about 12 minutes and we have a lot of questions. So I would like to go through at least some of them. And Carol has, I think, one question that she would like to convey.
Okay, so this question is by our colleague James Ryan, and it's actually for Mehmet Ali Tuğtan. And he asks, prior to the late 60s and 70s, wasn't the aim of the Kemalist CHP to occupy the populist left space themselves? And if you agree that's the case, why do you think they failed?
Well, you know, yes and no. They did, I mean, they wanted to occupy the space in the hearts and minds of the rural and the emerging urban underclasses, the peasants and the blue-collar workers and the informal workers. But I don't think they wanted to change themselves. You know, they wanted to stay at the center of politics. They wanted to remain as the establishment. And at the end of the day, their effort was too little, too late. most prominently displayed through the encouragement of the village institutes or the public homes, halk evleri. The left wing of CHP was a casualty of early Cold War. Tanıl Bora recently published a biography of Hasan Ali Yücel, and the recent anniversary of the founding of the village institutes sparked the debate anew in Turkey. CHP's left wing was never its specialty. It wasn't their strong arm. And the Cold War only made it worse. I would also add that Atatürk's early passing and his replacement by the ever-conservative İsmet İnönü, whom, as I said, leaned on the more familiar nationalist, people in the political establishment to shore up the regime and the country, was also unfortunate for the more radical, more innovative left-wing cadres inside the CHP.
Okay, so there is a question about the workers' organizations. So the person, Gemma Taylor, asks, why was there no powerful worker organization? Was there a difference between the economic conditions of Turkey and Latin American states that assisted in the process of Islamization? So, and I guess like with this, I would like to also invite you to speak a little bit about maybe the 71 intervention and 80 coup. And then perhaps as my question, you could also respond to maybe the CIA's involvement in that and what it means. I know it's a big question to deal with, but I would like to come to that, what it means for American policy at the moment. American foreign policy at the moment.
There had been a very strong working class organization in Turkey starting in the 60s. And in 1970s, it played a major role in Turkish politics. However, it was considered as a threat by Turkish political establishment. Entered into the parliament in 1965. It was a socialist party, but the party was banned by constitutional court after the 1971 coup. In 1970s, Turkish working class organizations played a major role within Turkey. And interestingly, maybe to make the picture much more complicated for the audience, starting in 1960s, they played a major role in West Germany because the number of Turkish immigrants increased significantly in 1960s and 70s, and Turkish working class played a major role in German politics, in West German politics, supported by Turkish Communist Party, which was centered in East Germany. Therefore, to make the picture more complicated, Germany, the West German government, considered this Turkish working class organization within West Germany and within Turkey as a threat for its own nation's security, because it was supported by GDR, East Germany, and also by Soviet Union. For this area, in my speech, I didn't have time to talk about, but I'm glad that Mehmet Ali Tuğtan mentioned the foreign dynamics in the Turkish Cold War context. He mentioned the name of Ruzi Nazar. Ruzi Nazar was a German collaborator during the Second World War, and he hid it after 1945, a couple of years in Germany, and then he was sent to United States. Interestingly, in 1959, from 1959 till 1971, he was the head of CIA intelligence in Ankara. Therefore, this political Islam network, which really picked up in 1960s against left, was also Ruzi Nazar and CIA within Turkey, who considered the rising left and the rising left within working class and within students organizations. Don't forget that in 1968, American ambassador's car were literally burned down in one of the Ankara universities. This political Islamist, anti-communist political Islamist network was also supported by CIA, especially by Ruzi Nazar in 1960s. In the 1971 coup changed the dynamic a little bit because the Turkish establishment, especially the generals in the Turkish army, were not very happy that Turkish national intelligence and CIA was really working very close to each other. They literally thought that Turkish national intelligence was controlled by the CIA. And after 1971 coup, we see a little bit of autonomization of Turkey's national intelligence. And this situation was really once again changing after 1974 Turkey's military intervention in Cyprus, where there was an American embargo on Turkey. And we see Turkish national intelligence and Turkish anti-communist establishment became really autonomous from United States. After 1980 coup, and interestingly, Turgut Özal became one of the key figures in the government. There is this portrayal of Turkish Islam as a civil movement, anti-military, anti-militarist movement, but this is not true. Turgut Özal, who was a candidate in 1977 election from Milli Selamet Party, from Erbakan's party, became the key figure in the military government after the 1980 coup. And really, Turkish military opened the doors of power for Turgut Özal in 1983 election. Therefore, this paradigm portraying Turkish military as a secularist and authoritarian key actor in Turkish politics, suppressing Islamism is, I can easily say, completely wrong. We need a new paradigm to explain the Turkish Cold War in order to understand what's going on in Turkey today.
Okay, I have a question by Hamid İncidilen, and the question is, starting from the mid-1950s, the CIA funded or co-opted certain local publications, like journals or newspapers, all around the world to promote the official US Cold War policy. Are you aware of any publications or particular journalists in Turkey that could be included in this category?
Yes, of course, the cultural Cold War, as it is called, was also waged in Turkey. And in our book, we try to cite the examples of civil society groups, sects, and political movements, as well as publications who were in close contact with the agenda of the American and Western Cold War establishment. And we see, in some rare cases, an open admission or an acknowledgement for the support of different American institutions. İlim Yayma Cemiyeti, for example, translates a book in 1951, and the book is translated with the help of the American embassy. İlim Yayma Cemiyeti is well, a civil society organization devoted to the training of virtuous youth, as it calls itself. So why do they translate American literature? They say, the justification is, because nowadays so many young and bright Turkish youth, Muslim Turkish youth, prefer the United States for their studies abroad. We wanted to introduce the United States to them. So it's an introduction of the United States in the most favorable light possible to the future elite of the country who is to go to train in the United States and then come back and engage in political or economic positions of leadership. There are several other examples, more ominous ones, like Mehmet Şevket Eygi, who had also in a 2007, if I remember correctly, interview, admitted that he had preferred the Americans over the Soviets, making the allegory of chicken farming. He said the American imperialism is in the business of production of eggs, whereas the Soviet imperialism is in the business of production of meat. As a chicken, which one would you prefer? Of course, I prefer the Americans, he says. So, yes, in the book itself, we have a few examples like this one. And in Turkey, there were journalists, civil society groups, publications that maintained contact and acknowledged support of the Cold War establishment during those years.
I would add Yeni İstiklal, which was a weekly newspaper established in 1960-61 by Mehmet Şevket Eygi. And I read all of these issues of Yeni İstiklal, and there is a clear link between the propaganda material published by Yeni İstiklal, and it was a CIA material. How did they get it? I don't know. But Mehmet Şevket Eygi, which is a key Islamist figure, which was a key Islamist figure in Turkey since 1960s, who was a strong defender of NATO alliance in 1960s, and who was a vehement anti-communist figure in Islamist newspapers. And he had a close link with Muslim World League and attended a couple of meetings of Muslim World League in Mecca, late 1960s. Therefore, Mehmet Şevket Eygi and Yeni İstiklal is key publication. And I should add one more point. There is a Munich-based institute funded by CIA and Sovyetler Birliği Araştırma Enstitüsü, Research Institute on Soviet Studies, and it published many journals in different languages. And this is a clearly CIA-funded institute in Munich. And if you look at these journals, and I read the Turkish ones, there are very interesting names who participated in their events. The archives are open, and I wouldn't like to name the names, but some of the names are very striking.
Okay, so we're 4 minutes over our time. So this has been a very, very interesting conversation, and it's just the beginning, I think, of Turkey's social scientists getting into the Cold War era and studying. We have done a lot on the first years of the Republic. There's still work to be done there, but this is a very, very missing sort of link in our historiography of Turkish politics, the Cold War era, and we have a lot to do there. And I accept this as the beginning of our conversations and this book, there are other books as well that we'll like to feature in the future in this program. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming, and thank you to our speakers. And I will just turn to Baki because he also wants to say a couple of words before we end. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these great presentations and suggesting a very different way of looking at Turkey today and Turkey's 20th century experience. I guess many social scientists would have to think about the implications of this, the way in which the dear Sherif Mardin would explain a lot of things looks different with some of the things you said today. And maybe, as Ayça rightly pointed out, we need to talk more, and hopefully Ayça would organize new events at Stanford Program on Turkey, and we would hear about that. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your contributions today. Thank you, Ayça. Thank you, Carol. Have a wonderful day and have a wonderful week, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.